Imagine a wealthy, widowed millionaire lost in his grief, sits alone at a quiet restaurant staring into the emptiness of his life. Across from him, his young daughter, once full of life, now barely touches her food. The air is heavy with silence, when suddenly a waitress, tired, worn, but full of quiet strength, steps in. With just one simple act, she feeds his daughter, and to his surprise, she eats it willingly, something she hasn't done in months. Who is this woman, and why does it feel like fate has brought her into his life? As Samuel watches her, questions swirl in his mind. But the real question is, could this stranger hold the key to healing his broken family? If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Now let's jump into the story. Samuel Carter sat alone in the dimly lit corner of a small restaurant, his thoughts as dark as the heavy rain falling outside. The sound of the rain tapping against the window was almost soothing, but it couldn't quiet the storm inside his chest. He had everything: wealth, a big house, cars, and a name known in every corner of the business world. But none of it mattered anymore. None of it could bring back his wife, Isabel. 2 years had passed since the accident that stole her from him, but the pain still felt fresh. Samuel had built an empire from the ground up, but after losing Isabel, everything seemed pointless. His life was nothing but an empty space where happiness used to live. There was no joy in the riches he had worked so hard to earn. Without Isabel, the house felt like a mansion of silence. Without her laughter, the world had lost its color. His 6-year-old daughter, Emily, was the only thing that kept him going. The small girl who once filled their home with light and laughter had become a shadow of herself. Since her mother's death, Emily had barely spoken, hardly eaten, and had withdrawn into herself as if trying to disappear into the darkness of her grief. Samuel had tried everything. He had hired the best nannies, sent Emily to therapy, and showered her with expensive gifts. But nothing worked. The smile that used to light up her face was now a memory. She no longer even laughed, not even when he tried to make her smile. Samuel ran a hand through his messy hair, his fingers brushing against the roughness of his unshaven face. The wine in his glass sat untouched. His eyes shifted to Emily, who was sitting across from him, poking her mashed potatoes without much interest. Her once bright blue eyes now seemed dull, lifeless, as if they no longer saw the world the way they once had. She didn't even look at him anymore, her gaze lost in her own thoughts. It broke Samuel's heart to see her like this. She had been his world. He sighed, the weight of the grief pressing down on him, making it harder to breathe. How could he help her when he couldn't even help himself? How could he bring his daughter back from the brink of this endless sorrow? He couldn't find the answer, and that left him feeling more helpless than ever. He took another sip of his untouched wine, his mind far away, lost in the memories of better days. It was at that moment that a soft voice broke through the haze of his thoughts. "Come on, sweetheart, just one more bite, okay?" Samuel's gaze shifted to the voice, his frown deepening. There beside their table was a young waitress, no older than 25, with hazel eyes that seemed to hold a quiet strength. Her dark hair was tied up in a messy bun, and her uniform was slightly worn, showing the strain of a long shift. She knelt beside Emily, holding a spoonful of mashed potatoes to the little girl's lips. Samuel's brow furrowed. Why was this woman feeding his daughter? He was about to speak, to tell her to step away, but then something happened that stopped him in his tracks. Emily, his withdrawn, silent daughter, took the bite. Not only did she take it, but she ate it willingly. Samuel's chest tightened. For months, he had tried everything to get Emily to eat, to get her to open up. But nothing had worked. And now a stranger, a complete stranger, had done it effortlessly. The waitress smiled gently at Emily, brushing a lock of blonde hair from the little girl's face. "See? That wasn't so bad," she whispered softly. Samuel felt his breath catch in his throat. Was this real? Could it really be that simple? How was it possible that this woman who had only just met his daughter could break through the wall of silence Emily had built around herself? He clenched his fists under the table, confusion and anger mixing inside him. He didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. There was something about this woman, something in the way she interacted with Emily that felt both familiar and entirely foreign. It wasn't just the simple act of feeding Emily. It was the tenderness, the care, the way she seemed to understand his daughter in a way that no one else had. Samuel watched as Emily let out a soft giggle, a sound he hadn't heard since before Isabel's death. It was a real giggle, the kind that came from pure joy, not the forced kind she had been giving him lately. Samuel's mind raced as he watched the scene unfold. Who was this woman? What made her so special? Why did it feel like she had just entered his life at the exact moment he needed her most? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Emily's voice, a quiet plea that broke through his thoughts. "Daddy, please don't be mad at her," Emily whispered, her small hand tugging at his sleeve. "She was just helping me." The words hit Samuel like a punch to the stomach. His daughter, the little girl who had been closed off from the world, who hadn't spoken to anyone in months, was defending this woman. A stranger. He exhaled slowly, his voice softer now. "You're not in trouble, sweetheart," he said, looking down at her. "I just don't understand why you trust her." The waitress, who had been watching them quietly, took a small step back as if realizing how it might look. "I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, standing up. "I didn't mean to overstep. I just saw that she wasn't eating and I thought I could help." Samuel studied her, searching her face for any sign of insincerity, but all he saw was sincerity, an openness in her eyes that was unlike anything he had ever seen before. This wasn't just a waitress. There was something deeper, something more to her than met the eye. He didn't know why, but he felt an overwhelming urge to know more, to understand who she was and why, for the first time in months, he wasn't alone. The suspense lingered in the air as Samuel watched the waitress, Sarah, as he noticed her name tag said, walk away, disappearing into the crowd of the restaurant. His mind was spinning. There was something about her, something that made him feel like he wasn't so lost anymore. But who was she really? And why did it feel like fate had placed her in his path? Samuel couldn't shake the image of Sarah from his mind. Long after she had disappeared into the bustling restaurant, his thoughts were tangled around her, her kindness, the way she spoke to Emily, the gentle way she fed her. Everything about her felt different from the usual people he encountered. Her actions were not born of obligation or the desire for a tip, but from something deeper, something sincere. It was as if Sarah had known exactly what it was like to hurt, to feel lost. The following day, Samuel found himself back at the same restaurant. It wasn't just the meal he was after. Something inside him pulled him back there, something that didn't make sense but he couldn't ignore. As he entered, the familiar sound of laughter and clinking plates filled the air, but his eyes immediately searched for Sarah. He found her at the far end of the restaurant, moving swiftly between tables, her movements efficient, but not hurried. There was a calmness to her demeanor that stood out in a place that thrived on speed. Samuel watched her for a few moments, noting the way she interacted with her customers. Always patient, always kind. Her tired eyes and worn shoes told him everything he needed to know about her struggles. When Sarah passed by his table, their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. She paused, hesitating for a second before offering a shy smile. Samuel didn't want to break the silence between them, but he had to know. "You're the one who helped Emily yesterday," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Sarah nodded, her smile dimming slightly. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she replied, looking at the floor for a brief moment. "I just saw she wasn't eating and I thought I could help." Samuel could hear the sincerity in her voice, and something in him softened. There was no pretense in her words, no judgment, just a simple understanding. He leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Why did you help her?" he asked, his voice quiet but insistent. "You don't know her. You don't owe her anything." Sarah's gaze flickered to the side as if searching for the right words. "I know what it's like to be lost," she murmured, her voice low, almost a whisper. "To feel like nothing matters anymore. Samuel felt a pang in his chest, a connection. He couldn't explain. He had felt that way since Isabel's death. Empty, unsure of where to go or how to pick up the pieces. Sarah's words resonated with him in a way he hadn't expected. "I lost my mother when I was young," Sarah continued, her eyes now meeting his with an openness that surprised him. "After she died, I stopped eating too. Nothing tasted good. Nothing felt right. I was lost, just like your daughter." Samuel's heart tightened. He couldn't help but imagine the pain Sarah must have felt as a child, losing the one person who had been everything to her. He had been so focused on his own grief, on Emily's pain, that he hadn't considered what it was like for someone else to experience loss. But Sarah wasn't just talking about her past, she was talking about Emily, about the shared pain between them. "Someone helped me when I was young," Sarah added, her voice steady now. "They showed me that even when everything feels broken, there are still people who care. Maybe I just wanted to be that person for her." Samuel sat in silence, taking in her words. It was as if a veil had been lifted from his eyes. He had spent the last 2 years trying to fix everything with his wealth, with his resources, with his control. But Sarah was showing him something different. She wasn't using money or power to fix things. She was using kindness, understanding, and empathy. He thought back to the many times he had tried to get Emily to eat, to smile, to do anything that resembled the little girl he once knew. He had been so desperate to fix her, to bring her back, that he had ignored the simple truth. Sometimes healing didn't come from fixing. It came from understanding, from someone showing you that it was okay to hurt, that it was okay to be broken. Sarah's actions had brought that out in Emily. She had made her feel seen, not as a sad, broken child, but as someone worthy of care and attention. And in that moment, Samuel realized that he had been looking at things all wrong. You really understand, don't you?" Samuel said, his voice filled with awe. "You understand what it's like to be lost?" Sarah nodded, a quiet smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I do. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to feel like you're the only one carrying your pain. But sometimes, we just need someone to notice. Someone to reach out and remind us that we're not alone." The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time in a long time, Samuel didn't feel so alone. He had been consumed by his grief, so wrapped up in trying to fix everything that he had forgotten the one thing that could truly help: connection. The conversation was interrupted by a voice calling from the kitchen. Sarah's face tightened for a moment and she sighed, standing up. "I'm sorry, I have to get back to work," she said, offering him a small smile. "But if you need anything, just let me know." Samuel watched her walk away, a new understanding forming in his chest. There was something about Sarah that had shaken him to his core. It wasn't just her kindness, her empathy. It was the way she had seen Emily for who she truly was. As the night went on, Samuel's mind continued to spin. He couldn't stop thinking about Sarah and what she had said. Maybe, just maybe, she was the missing piece he had been searching for all along. Not because of her actions, but because she had reminded him of something he had forgotten: how to truly see someone, not as a problem to fix, but as a person who needed understanding and care. As he looked over at Emily, who had started to nibble at her food, he felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, things were beginning to change. The following days felt strange to Samuel, as if the ground beneath him had shifted slightly, yet he couldn't find a way to steady himself. Everything seemed to move more slowly, more thoughtfully. He couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. She was a mystery to him, someone who had come into his life unexpectedly and made him see the world in a new light. Her words, her actions had left an indelible mark on him. He found himself returning to the cafe almost every day, not because he wanted another meal, but because he needed to understand the connection that had started between them. A connection he hadn't even known he was missing. On one particularly quiet afternoon, Samuel walked into the cafe with the usual heaviness in his heart, unsure of what he was hoping to find. As soon as he entered, the familiar warmth of the place wrapped around him and his eyes instinctively searched for Sarah. She was there, as usual, moving between tables, her presence as calming as ever. Today, however, she seemed different. There was a certain distance in the way she carried herself, a quiet exhaustion that was more than just physical. Her eyes were shadowed, and her movements were slower, like she was carrying more than the weight of her worn-out shoes. Samuel hesitated at the door, unsure of how to approach her. There was a discomfort in the air that he couldn't shake. He had been coming here, watching her, wondering if there was something more to their brief interactions. But today felt different. Today it felt like she was pulling away from him, like something had changed in the fragile space they had shared. Finally, after several moments of indecision, Samuel made his way to a table near the window. He sat down and waited, trying to steady the unease swirling in his stomach. As Sarah passed by his table, her eyes met his for a brief moment. She smiled faintly, but didn't stop. It was almost as if she was avoiding him. Samuel's heart sank. "Sarah," he called gently, not wanting to be too forward but unable to let her slip away. She stopped, glancing over her shoulder at him. Her face was a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice tinged with hesitation. "Did you need something?" "I was hoping we could talk," Samuel said, his voice quiet. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable, but the feeling in his chest was too strong to ignore. "You seem different today. Is everything okay?" For a moment, Sarah stood there, her gaze flickering with uncertainty. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping as if she had been holding something in for too long. "It's nothing, really," she said quickly, trying to brush it off. "Just some personal stuff, it happens." Samuel could sense the walls going up between them, but he couldn't let it go. There was something in her voice, in the way she had said it, that made him feel like she was hiding more than she was letting on. "Sarah, you don't have to pretend with me," he said softly. "I know what it's like to carry a burden on your own. You don't have to do that." There was a long pause, and then Sarah finally pulled up a chair to sit across from him. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and wariness, as though she wasn't sure whether to trust him with her pain. "It's my daughter," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "Cecilia, she's sick, really sick. I can't afford the treatment she needs." She looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her apron. "I've been trying to make ends meet, working as much as I can, but it's just not enough. I'm scared, Mr. Carter, scared that I might lose her." Samuel's chest tightened as he listened to Sarah's words. There was a heaviness in her voice, a rawness that he hadn't expected. The calm, collected woman he had seen before was gone, replaced by a mother in desperate pain, trying to hold everything together for the sake of her child. "I had no idea," Samuel murmured, his heart aching for her. "I can't imagine what you're going through." "I'm sorry, Sarah. I had no idea that you were carrying so much." He leaned forward, his voice sincere. "Let me help." Sarah looked up at him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and defiance. "No, Mr. Carter," she said, her tone firm. "I don't need your charity. I'm not asking for a handout. I just want to do what's best for my daughter. That's all." Samuel was taken aback by her refusal. It wasn't the reaction he had expected, but it made sense. She wasn't the type of person to accept help without feeling like she had earned it. Yet, he couldn't stand to see her suffer, to see a woman with so much strength and pride crumble under the weight of her circumstances. "I'm not offering charity, Sarah," he said gently. "I'm offering support. I want to help you get your daughter the care she needs. You've already helped my daughter in ways I couldn't. I owe you that." For a moment, Sarah stared at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he was serious. Samuel didn't flinch under her gaze. He understood her hesitation. He understood the pride that came with refusing help, especially when that help came from someone with so much more than you. But then, to his surprise, Sarah nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll accept your help, if you promise me something." She looked him straight in the eyes, her expression softening. "Promise me that you won't see me as some poor woman who needs saving. Promise me that you'll see me as a mother who's just trying to do what's best for her child." Samuel felt a lump form in his throat. "I promise," he said quietly. "I see you, Sarah. Not for your struggles, but for your strength." And in that moment, something shifted. The walls that had stood between them, those walls of pride, of pain, of fear, began to crumble. They were two people who had both lost something precious, who had both fought to hold on to what little they had left. And now, they were beginning to help each other heal. As Sarah looked at him, a small, grateful smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Carter," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me." Samuel nodded, his heart full. This was only the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of quiet tension, but also a quiet sense of change. Samuel couldn't quite explain it, but the simple act of offering Sarah help had shifted something within him. Something he hadn't even realized needed shifting. He had spent so long in his own grief, so focused on the emptiness he felt after Isabel's death, that he had almost forgotten what it was like to connect with someone. Truly connect. But now, as he continued to visit the cafe and check in on Sarah, something started to take root inside him. It was a feeling of purpose, of being part of something bigger than just his own pain. He had learned that Sarah had reluctantly agreed to seek medical help for her daughter, Cecilia, after he offered to cover the medical bills. Though she accepted, it was clear that she didn't feel entirely comfortable with the arrangement. Still, Samuel couldn't help but admire her determination. She wasn't asking for charity. She just needed a lifeline, and he had offered it. The thought of Cecilia, a sick little girl, gnawed at Samuel. He couldn't bear the idea of another child going through the pain of a parent's loss. He could relate to the aching hole in Sarah's heart. It was a shared experience, one that bound them together in an unspoken understanding. But unlike Sarah, Samuel had the resources to fight the battle she couldn't afford to fight. He found himself returning to the cafe more frequently, and with each visit, the connection between him and Sarah grew stronger. Their conversations were always light at first. Small talk about the weather, about the cafe, about how Emily was doing. Samuel would occasionally share a little about his life, but mostly, he listened. Listening was something he had forgotten how to do in the midst of his own suffering. And now, for the first time in a long time, he was genuinely listening. But as much as Samuel wanted to help Sarah, there was one thing that continued to weigh heavily on his mind. He knew that Sarah was still carrying a burden, one she refused to share with him. It was clear in the way she spoke, in the way she looked away whenever the subject of her past came up. The walls she had carefully built around herself remained intact, and Samuel knew that she was struggling to maintain the fragile sense of control she had over her life. It was a rainy afternoon when everything changed. Samuel had just finished a long day of business meetings and was looking forward to a quiet evening. But as he walked into the cafe, something felt off. Sarah was there, of course, but there was a noticeable difference in her demeanor. She was standing at the counter, her back to him, but Samuel could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was gripping the edge of the counter as if holding herself together. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. It was time to push past the surface-level conversations. He needed to understand what was really going on with her. Something told him that whatever burden she was carrying had reached a breaking point. As he walked over to her, he noticed the way her hands were trembling slightly. It wasn't the usual kind of weariness she carried. It was something else, something darker, something that had been eating away at her. "Sarah?" he called softly, his voice steady but gentle. She turned quickly, her eyes wide for a moment, before she tried to mask the emotion swirling behind them. "Oh, Mr. Carter, I didn't see you there." "Are you okay?" Samuel asked, his voice low, filled with genuine concern. For a moment she didn't respond. Her eyes flickered toward the kitchen, as if considering running away, but then something in her expression shifted. Something cracked. "It's Cecilia," Sarah finally whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "She's not getting any better. The doctors don't know what else to do. They've tried everything, and now they're telling me she might not make it." Samuel felt the air in the room grow heavier, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had known Cecilia's condition was serious, but hearing it so plainly from Sarah was like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a battle to be won with money. It was a fight for a life that meant the world to Sarah. He took a step closer to her, his heart aching for her. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he said, his voice full of empathy. "I know there's nothing anyone can say to make this better, but I want you to know, I'm here for you. Whatever you need, I'm here." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know what to do anymore," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I fought so hard to make sure Cecilia had a chance, but it's all slipping away. I don't know how to keep going. I'm scared. I'm so scared of losing her." The raw pain in her voice broke Samuel's heart. He had never felt so helpless. Here was this woman, a mother doing everything she could to save her child, and yet the weight of the world seemed to be pushing her down. He wanted to do more. He wanted to fix everything to make it right, but he knew that this wasn't a problem money could solve. This was something far more profound. This was a fight for a future, for a life. "Sarah," Samuel said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady and firm. "I can't imagine what you're going through, but I know this. You don't have to fight this alone anymore. I'm not just offering money. I'm offering support. I'm here, every step of the way." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, Samuel saw the walls around her begin to crumble. "I don't know how to let anyone in," she whispered, her voice full of vulnerability. "I've spent so long pushing people away, convincing myself I could do it all on my own. But I can't anymore." Samuel nodded, understanding all too well the pain of losing someone you love and the fear of letting anyone else in. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "Let me help. Let me be there for you. For Cecilia." Sarah hesitated. For a moment, the walls in her eyes slowly starting to fall, but then, with a quiet sigh, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, I'll let you help. Thank you." Samuel's heart swelled with relief. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, and he knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond just helping his own family. He was going to help Sarah, and in doing so, help Cecilia. He was going to fight for them, just as he would have fought for his own family. The shift in his heart was subtle, but it was there. He had spent so many years focused on fixing the wrong things, fixing his wealth, his empire, his broken heart. But now, he was focused on something real, something that truly mattered: love, connection, and the strength to carry on, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. "We'll get through this," Samuel said, his voice steady with conviction. "Together." And as he looked into Sarah's eyes, he knew this was just the beginning of a journey he never expected to take. A journey that would change everything.